What follows is largely adapted from Chapter 3 of Gretchen McCulloch's 2019 book, Because Internet: Understanding the New Rules of Language. In that chapter, McCulloch classifies different types of Internet people according to when they first went online and how they adopted Internet communication when they did. Note that these groups are not strictly based on age. They're mainly determined by the relationships people have with social use of the Internet. So someone born in, say, 1980 could be categorized in one of a few different groups. First, I'll lay out the classifications and descriptions. Then I'll suggest how they might be useful in thinking about communication between groups, especially in an academic setting. McCulloch divides the era of Internet communication into three waves. The first of these covers the time before the Internet became mainstream, which is basically pre-1995-ish. Those who began socializing online during this period, classified as old Internet people, did so on platforms like Usenet, IRC, BBS, or other topic-based forums, used to talk to strangers with similar interests. This group has the highest average technological skill level, since in the early days of Internet communication, one had to be technically adept just to get online. A relevant analogy is with cars. The earliest drivers had to be mechanics as well, because the cars were not reliable and user-friendly yet. Old Internet people similarly tend to be comfortable going under the hood of a computer and often know at least some coding. In terms of Internet language, most early jargon was technical rather than social until the early 1990s, when basic abbreviations like LOL and BRB became widespread. Two distinguishing features across the types of Internet people are their relationships with email and with Facebook. Old Internet people remember the days of Pine and other messaging systems that existed before standard email programs, and are very familiar with conducting business and social correspondence online. As for Facebook, they tend to be dismissive of it because for them the idealized function of Internet communication is global reach, not the reinforcement of existing offline social circles. They do likely have Facebook accounts that they begrudgingly use to keep up with family and friends. The second wave came in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when the proliferation of Internet service providers and browsers brought a majority of Americans to the Internet. The folks who began using Internet communication at this time are split into two groups: full Internet people and semi-Internet people. Full Internet people adopted online communication as a major part of their social lives, never questioning the social potential of the Internet, and typically first used AOL Instant Messenger, LiveJournal, MySpace, or blogs to connect with others. They took to the frequent posting of their current status, activities, likes, and dislikes, usually communicating with friends rather than strangers. Full Internet people reveled in the ability to connect with the people they knew all the time online. By this time, the ability to socialize online no longer required a lot of facility with how computers work more generally, since platforms have become much more what you see is what you get, without coding or computer command knowledge needed. As a result, the technological skills of this group tend to be piecemeal, with people proficient in a limited suite of tools they use frequently. Full Internet people don't remember an Internet without established jargon, which they associate with tone of voice. Email to this group tends to be seen as mostly a formal work thing they have to do, as they'd prefer to message, text, or chat. They probably once used Facebook to build a huge network of friends, but may have moved primarily to other social networks as Facebook became increasingly associated with the olds. These are the people who most commonly grumble that their parents are now on Facebook. Semi-Internet people went online at the same time as full Internet people, but did not immediately embrace the Internet as a social conduit. They probably used the Internet first for work, then tentatively began extending into social communication, and likely harbor skepticism about getting to know someone primarily online. Semi-Internet people's social lives therefore didn't change much with the advent of Internet communication, and they probably restrict their socialization to things like Facebook or maybe Twitter or YouTube, interacting mainly with people they already know offline. For them, the Internet is mainly for information and keeping up with family and friends, not for wider contact with people in general. Members of this group are likely to say, "I'm not a computer person," though they might have deep skills in specific programs they have to use for work. Semi-Internet people don't tend to embrace Internet-specific slang or style, so the way they write online closely resembles the way they write offline. They probably use email for work a lot, so they have a strong sense of its conventions. Facebook, as an extension of their offline social life, is a primary platform for semi-internet people. The third wave arrived when the internet became pretty much unavoidable, starting around 2005. Those who begin online communication after this time are also split into two types, excluding those who've never gone online at all. Post-internet people, as the name suggests, don't remember going online for the first time, since the internet has always been there for them. They began online communication as soon as they learned how to read, and likely first socialized online using Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, or similar platforms, which are inextricably woven into their social lives. Despite swimming in the waters of computer-mediated communication essentially from birth, their technological skills are often spotty. They might know the cool new apps well, but lack knowledge of what other groups might consider basic, since technical skill is now decoupled from online social savvy. For example, a post-internet person might be able to make a TikTok, or whatever the most recent popular app is, easily, but not know how to format a Word document or attach a file to an email. Born into a world in which nearly everyone is online, they manage their social identities across platforms to avoid context collapse, in which people from different aspects of their lives can see all of their posts across all applications, speaking one way in one space and another way in another. Since online communication is integral to their lives, they tend to be hypersensitive to tone and text, often reading deeply into punctuation, word choice, emoji usage, and so on. Post-internet people began using online communication before having to work, so they often skipped over email and went right to social media. Email is thus a bit baffling to them and is not a reliable way to reach them, since they don't really use it unless absolutely necessary. To this group, Facebook is something their parents have been using for years, which makes it unappetizing and archaic seeming. The final group is pre-internet people, who were around before online communication began in earnest, but tried to avoid engaging with it for years. Internet usage for those aged 65 plus went from 14% in 2000 to 50% in 2012. If they socialize online at all, they likely use either Facebook or email, but those still don't feel natural to them. Pre-internet people often prefer to stick to just one method of communication, and that account was likely set up for them by someone else. Any technical issue, including being logged out of that account, might result in a call for help to the person who set up the account for them. This group doesn't typically use any internet jargon or style, and often port over conventions from handwritten or typewritten informal communication, such as separation characters like ... or dash between utterances or even within an utterance, as in, went to the mall ... saw a sweater ... thought of you. If members of this group use email or texting, they tend to treat it like offline correspondence rather than a distinct medium with its own conventions, as portrayed in this clip from the sitcom Brooklyn Nine-Nine. As for Facebook, pre-internet people might use it to look at photos of family members, but likely don't see the internet as a legitimate means of social interaction. So what can be taken away from this division of internet people in terms of communication in an academic setting? One thing you might have noticed is that there's a lot of variance between the groups regarding their view of how language works. As McCulloch notes, the answer to the question, who is the language authority in your head when writing on a computer, can be different for different types of internet people. For pre- or semi-internet people, that little voice in their head is likely an English teacher or a style guide, while for full or post-internet people, it's more probably the collective wisdom of their peers. One way I talk about this in my writing courses is through an analogy to basketball. Imagine that from an early age you've played outdoor, half-court, 3-on-3 basketball. You've played that way nearly every day for hours on end. Then you're suddenly told that you have to play indoor, full-court, 5-on-5 NBA-style basketball, and will be evaluated on your ability to do so. It's still basketball, so you feel somewhat comfortable, but a lot of fundamental things seem arbitrarily different. You have to get used to a 94-foot court with 5 players on each team, possession changes on scored baskets, there are 12-minute quarters and a shot clock, and so on. Not only that, but there are now referees whistling you for violations for doing things you've always done and never had your opponents or teammates object to before. This is what it's like for most full or post-internet people, which is what the majority of college students are when they begin academic writing. They've been immersed in informal writing for a long time and have internalized the conventions of that type of writing. So when they're asked to write in other contexts, it can feel like arbitrary rules are being enforced on them. None of their peers has ever noted a comma splice in one of their text messages, and probably over 90% of the writing they've done in their lives since age 10 has been peer-to-peer communication. As McCulloch observes, digital residency tends to begin between 9 and 14, and teens have always wanted unstructured time away from the supervision of adults. These days, that takes the form of digital communication with each other, rather than hanging out at the mall or a convenience store parking lot. Dana Boyd draws a useful distinction to illustrate the role of informal online communication in modern adolescent socialization. Quote, "Most teens aren't addicted to social media. If anything, they're addicted to each other." Even if they've been given rigorous instruction in formal writing and grammar, which is not a guarantee, the sheer number of repetitions of informal writing swamps that information in practice. To complicate things even further, for people raised on digital communication, writing is tied to identity in a way that it typically isn't for people who learned to write before the internet. As technologist Jenny Sundin has put it, on the internet, how you write is who you are. If a central part of your social interaction with others is through digital communication, people get to know you textually. To them, you are likely as much a written entity as a physical one. Writing is tied to the performance of self, so being expected to produce impersonal, objective, disembodied formal writing in college can feel unnatural and disorienting. That sense of conflicting conceptions of what writing is and what it does can be seen in differences between how various types of internet people view punctuation marks and expressions. For instance, while other groups might use ellipses to indicate neutral trailing off, uncertainty, or continuation, full and post-internet people tend to see ellipses as foreboding or angry. Texting, "let's talk later, ... to a full or post-internet person will likely cause them to panic about being dumped, fired, told some kind of horrible news, etc., even if the sender just intends the dots to indicate a sense that things will be picked up again in the future. Similarly, terminal periods in text, tweets, or other online comments are typically read as cold or passive-aggressive. "I'm going to get home late, so make yourself dinner" would likely be read as purely informative, while "I'm going to get home late, so make yourself dinner, period" would likely be read with the tone of the angry slamming of a door. This might sound ridiculous to someone who thinks periods are just the proper way to indicate the end of a sentence, but you might get a better understanding of the mindset of someone who reads them as expressing cold finality if you think about how exclamation points have come to be used in email. Look at your recent email messages and note how many of the exclamation points you used actually express excitement. The degree to which exclamation points have become conventional and even necessary indicators of warmth can be seen in a 2014 Onion article headlined, "Stone-Hearted Ice Witch Forgoes Exclamation Point." That recognition of how your own language use has been altered by digital communication's need to replace physical gestures and vocal intonations with other ways to convey meaning, like LOL as a softener rather than an expression of actual laughter, or the use of emoji to denote tone, connects to Gretchen McCulloch's call to humility in her book. She reminds readers that communication practices that confuse or annoy you serve a particular purpose for those who use them, and the kind of language they use isn't necessarily deficient or degraded, it's just different. 3-on-3 basketball is still basketball, and it has its own consistent rules and practices. Adapting to formal writing from predominantly informal writing is often challenging for college students, and merely angrily blowing the whistle at them is not the most productive way to engage with them. In the other direction, digital natives rolling their eyes at the olds who don't get it is equally unproductive. Hopefully this examination of different relationships to internet language can help engender a sense of understanding, if not empathy, that might improve communication.